Wherever I was happy. At peace. I knew that everyone I cared about was all right. I knew it. Time didn't mean anything. Nothing had form, but I was still me, you know? And I was warm. And I was loved. And I was finished. Complete. I don't understand theology or dimensions, any of it really. But I think I was in heaven. And now I'm not. I was torn out of there. Pulled out by my friends. Everything here is hard and bright and violent. Everything I feel, everything I touch. This is hell. Just getting through the next moment and the one after that. Knowing what I've lost.
Good job, Buffy. Good job at having a Sophia moment. And to the rest of you, Merry Matrix and a Hylic New Year. For those of you not familiar, this is my traditional parody holiday greeting, as we churn and burn in the season of rank materialism, putrid commercialism, and synthetic spiritualism. On this December, the year of our Demiurge 2017. So why not talk about death? Makes sense, as this is the time of the year where many souls die against the din of extroverted celebrations and gaslight family events, where the sun perishes in the solstice like a Christ God-man, and in truth, where the incoming winter season brings introversion, dead silence to the senses that hopefully leads to renewing contemplation. For me, the holiday season is a period to reflect on those departed that won't be coming to gathering or parties, won't be on the other side of calls or Skype conferences. Those whose light shines beyond, but not upon the new year coming up. The world is a little darker for me with their absence, more dead perhaps. I miss many people who are gone, family and friends, my mother and father, my brother Sean, my best friend and soulmate Sajad, my niece Molly, and so many others.
If we have souls, they are made of the love we share, undimmed by time, unbound by death.
I find myself missing a Chariot S, who departed just 2 years ago and still remains an endearing influence on my views and work. She passed away on December 25th, and for those who think that was a coincidence, well, you should know better. And you should live in the true world of magic, meaning, and myth. The real and alive world. I miss many as the world dies during the holiday season. How about you? Either way, death is a good topic. We will be discussing the chief incarnation and manifestation of death in this eternal now, in the aspect of Santa Muerte, as well as the death goddess archetype in general.
Embrace the probability of your imminent death, and know in your heart that there's nothing I can do to save you.
For this, our astral guest is Tracey Rowling, who materializes at the virtual Alexandria to discuss her new book, Santa Muerte, the history, rituals, and magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. Fabulous book and a fabulous interview, and yes, relevant to the Gnostic ethos, as you will hear shortly. For more information on the very cool Tracey, please visit, you got it, TraceyRowling.com, or check out the link at our show notes.
What seems to be the problem? Death.
Oh, and before I forget, this is Aeon by Gnostic Radio, broadcast from the lawful but frigid dystopia of Chicago, with your host Abraxas in his meat sack incarnation of Miguel Connor. I am your pompatus of Gnosis and your little death of cosmic ecstasy. Together we rise, divided we stand, always running with those searching for the truth and avoiding those who have found it. Always writing our own gospel and living our own myth, lest Jehovah and his angelic mafia hire ghostwriters of mediocrity and conformity and create a life we don't deserve. No thanks, old man. You're no longer a thing.
God isn't interested in technology. He knows nothing of the potential of the microchip or the silicon revolution. Look how he spends his time. 43 species of parrots. Nipples for men.
Speaking of the demiurge and death, I like how in Letters from Earth, Mark Twain said that in the Old Testament, Jehovah's greatest punishment on the humans he created but hated was death. But since he was such a sadist, he ramped up the cruelty and created hell in the New Testament via Jesus. Of course, in Gnostic texts, death is often an archon created by Yaldabaoth to make sure humanity doesn't remember its divine heritage. A dark face in the eternal wheel of reincarnation that keeps us in continuous forgetfulness.
You hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of inevitability. It is the sound of your death.
Like the Nag Hammadi libraries on the origin of the world says, after his son disobeys the demiurge and joins Grandma Sophia, quote, due to envy and wrath for his son Sabaoth, Yaldabaoth created death, which rules over the 6 heavens, but not the 7th of Sabaoth. Death, an androgynous being, mingle with its own nature and produce 7 androgynous offspring. The names of the male ones are jealousy, wrath, tears, sighing, suffering, lamentation, and bitter weeping. Of course, as Einar Thomason said, there might not be any archons. They're all just aspects of the demiurge and his schizoid personality.
I am the supreme being. I'm not entirely dim.
In other texts, the lower Sophia, the part of her at war with her son in the material world, is called the wisdom of death. As mentioned, Stacy will grant other connections to Sophia and Santa Muerte. It's complex, but that happens when, like Sophia, we are multidimensional beings trapped in 3 dimensions, forgetting our origins beyond the stars and cast in a sea of illusions. Death might be the greatest of illusions, and our dearly departed ones tell us this truth if we would just listen to them in this holiday season and the rest of the year. In the end, death was just a euphemism for ignorance for the Gnostics. And with eyes wide open, we see everything as it is. Infinite. And knowing Sophia is understanding infinity. Like the Gospel of Philip says, speaking of an avatar of Sophia, when Eve was still with Adam, death did not exist. When she was separated from him, death came into being. If he enters again and attains his former self, death will be no more.
I knew a man who once said death smiles at us all. All a man can do is smile back.
Thank you for being here, and thanks to those of you who support on a weekly basis with donations or being members, and some of you offering sound clip or whatever help I can use. You really do keep this Red Pill Cafeteria open. You really do make a difference as you die to your old selves and live as transformed beings of light. And as a bonus, perhaps a Christmas bonus, members and patrons of Patreon will not only get the second part of our interview with Tracey, but I have added an old interview dealing with the science and philosophy of death. It is an old interview that is kind of forgotten in our archive, but I feel is valuable and relevant for this episode and for this time of the year. The interviews with Alistair Conwell, where he discusses his book, The Audible Livestream, Ancient Secret of Dying While Living. I think you'll enjoy it after our powerful discussion on Santa Muerte and the death goddess archetype. Therefore and thusly, let us do the remarkable interview with Tracey Rowling on her book, Santa Muerte.
Well, look way down the river, and what do you think I see? I see a band of angels, and they're coming after me. Ain't no grave can hold my body down. There ain't no grave can hold my body down.
This is the AM Bite interview, and with us we definitely have the pleasure of being joined by Tracey Rowling to discuss her book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. How are you doing today, Tracey?
Doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks for coming on. As we talked before, I really enjoyed the book. It was spanning, and I got a lot out of it. So I'm sure the audience will too. But why don't we get started with you? And in the beginning, as I like to say, tell us a little bit about your background and how you became interested in Santa Muerte.
Well, my mother is a German immigrant. She came to the United States in the early 1970s. And I was raised by her here in the southwestern United States. I was born and raised in New Mexico. I was raised Catholic. So I was raised a very strong Catholic background, going to Mass several times a week, catechism several times a week, making sure that you have, communion straightened out, everything done. So very devout. When I was a teenager, I wound up splitting with the Catholic Church. Primary reason for it is I wanted to be a priest in the worst way, and of course, being a woman, I can't be a priest, so that kind of went bad in that situation. So I fell away from the Catholic Church and started looking at other more diverse spiritual practices. What I found most interesting about my upbringing as a Catholic was that you could actually go, and the idea was behind a lot of it that you could actually shape your belief towards a certain intent, and in a way that the belief was more important than the way you were going about doing certain things, okay? So I wound up practicing a lot of chaos magic. I got interested in witchcraft, and that's kind of how I became a pagan. Like a lot of folks, a lot of people are, ex-Catholics, recovering Catholics, don't you know? Particular to Santa Muerte, well, it's true. A lot of folks will describe themselves as recovering Catholics, don't they? So, particular to Santa Muerte, here in New Mexico, it's very common. You go into a grocery store to see large quantities of novena candles in them. What a novena candle is, it's a picture of a candle that has a saint on the front, any kind of saint, and a prayer to them on the back. And, of course, New Mexico is a predominantly Catholic state, so, of course, they sell these things in the grocery stores here. So I go in one day to go buy some blank novena candles. Like the 7-day wax candles are actually very cheap to buy in the grocery stores as a result. And I looked down when I'm there, and I saw a whole bunch of Santa Muerte candles. White ones, black ones, little friendly lady skeletons, Grim Reaper kind of lady. And I had no idea who she was. Now, I was raised Catholic in New Mexico, and I'd never heard of Santa Muerte. And yet, there was more shelf space dedicated to her than there was dedicated to the Virgin Mary, to Jesus, to several other very popular Catholic figures. So Out of curiosity, I went and bought a white candle because I couldn't figure it go wrong with the white ones. And I still had my rosary from when I was a child. Anyone who's listening to this will know that there's actually, if you're raised Catholic, there's actually a procedure to how you're supposed to use a novena candle. You just don't light it and say the prayer on the back. There's a ritual around it. So I went ahead and I did the rosary ritual I do, and I challenged Santa Muerte to reveal herself to me because I didn't even know if she was real, you know. Well, I have a friend of mine who likes to go around to garage sales and pick up, you know, every other people's junk, you know. So she comes to my house 2 days later after I issued a challenge to Santa Muerte, and she announces that she'd found a huge box of Halloween stuff. So I start digging through it, and it's, you know, it's rubber spiders and rubber bats and usual, you know, cheap decoration stuff. I get to the very, very bottom of the box. There's a Santa Muerte statue with 2 newsprint prayer guides written on it. So that's what I get for challenging Santa Muerte. She literally came to my house 2 days later. And that's kind of how it got started. So I like working with Santa Muerte quite a bit. My favorite thing about her is she tends to respond quickly. Usually within 2 or 3 days, you will get a response from her if you're going to get one at all. So just like that story.
Yeah, very interesting. So she's basically part of your life. She is there every day. She's your main gal. She's changed your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely, 100%. When I get up in the morning, there's a Santa Muerte statue in my bedroom. It's one of the first things I see. Before I get my cup of coffee, she gets her cup of coffee and her water in the morning, or in the evening, as it were, since I work nights. And, yeah, I'm looking at, here standing in my living room, I can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Santa Muerte statues. That gives you an idea, so.
Why do you think she is so popular in Mexican culture these days? I mean, she's not really a endorsed saint by the company.
Oh, no, not at all, not at all. Santa Muerte is an unofficial folk saint. Folk saints are unofficial anyway, kind of by their nature. You see, in order to become a saint in the Catholic Church, you have to have a certain number of things happen. One first thing is you have to actually be a real person. This has been a rule of the Catholic Church since about the 16th century. In addition to having once been a provable person, you have to perform a certain number of miracles and this kind of thing. Santa Muerte is actually generally believed to have come from one of 2 different backgrounds, probably a mix of these backgrounds. One of them would be an Aztec death goddess named Mictlantecuhtli, who was a very dominant goddess of death. You see, the Aztecs believed that the cycle of life and the cycle of death were held in perfect balance to each other. So anything that they did have as part of living day-to-day thing, I mean, the food that they had, the shelter that they had, the clothes they had on their backs, the medicine they had for their children, it was all taken from the land. Okay, so they were constantly in debt to the land. As a result, they felt that they had to give sacrifice back unto it in order to repay this constant debt that they had. So some people believe Santa Muerte is based on this ancient Aztec death goddess, Mictlantecuhtli. One of the reasons for this is she's associated with the Day of the Dead, considering she's actually thought to be the patron saint of the Day of the Dead, Santa Muerte. And that festival is thought to have a actually 3,000-year-old Aztec festival that largely venerated that one particular goddess, Mictlantecuhtli. Some people do believe that she came from Western Europe back at the time that Cortez was coming into Mexico and conquered Mexico. This was at the tail end, and certainly it's part of the cultural sequela of the Black Death. You know, 30 to 60% of your Canadian population dies. You know, a great religious revolution comes. You know, people think it's the result of, you know, God striking people down because of, you know, anger, because of lust, because of greed, because of fornication, because of lies, because of all this kind of stuff. That's why it killed half of Europe. So there was a very strong belief in the power of God, the idea of resurrection, and of course, the idea of death itself being an independent and strong spiritual figure. And what you'll see emerging in Spain and Italy around the 14th, 15th, and 16th centuries is a female version of the Grim Reaper, or Grim Repress, which is a term popularized by Dr. Andrew Chesnut, the guy who wrote Devoted to Death. Excellent book. Folks ought to go ahead and have a look at it. But anyhow, this female form of the Grim Reaper, sometimes stylized as Grim Reaper's wife, was a kinder, gentler version of death that would often take women, would often take children, could be bargained with. Unusual for death. Normally you think you can't bargain with death, but you could bargain with her. And this kind of idea. So this figure, of course, was also from Spain, and since Cortez was Spanish, he was familiar with her, and it's thought that a lot of people think that he brought this imagery, this kind of idea of a friendly female Grim Reaper with him from Spain. Because both of these backgrounds are mythological in nature. Santa Muerte cannot be recognized as a official Catholic saint of any kind because of the requirements put in place by the Catholic Church. Santa Muerte would also be barred in general from being recognized by the Catholic Church because, frankly, she doesn't have that good of a reputation in a lot of circles. She is a patron saint of people who tend to live on the fringes of society or who feel excluded from mainstream society for one reason or another. The reason for this is being a patron saint of death. Death comes for everyone, and death comes for everyone equally. As a result, it doesn't matter if, you're a high and mighty society person, or if you're very rich, or if you're very poor, you're going to die no matter what. So as a result, some people who believe that they are on the edges or fringes of society will turn to the worship of death or asking death for favors, since the other gods and the other spirits and other principalities that would be protecting them just simply aren't. They don't have a place to turn. Sometimes when Santa Muerte is referred to as a saint of last resort for exactly that reason. What kind of people would wind up following Santa Muerte? Well, depends how you define on the fringes of society. It may be something as mild as, well, you're a member of the LGBT community, for example, and therefore you feel excluded from mainstream society. It could be extreme as you're a violent drug cartel member who does terrible things to people on the borders and they find their blood days afterwards, you know what I mean? And it runs a wide variety, a wide spectrum. But death covers everyone, and death will protect everyone, and death will see everyone because death is a universal experience. That's kind of the idea behind the thing.
Tracey, there's a lot of here to unpack, and this is really great. What I think is interesting, I remember, and this, you mentioned this in your book, there is that scene in Breaking Bad where you've got the two narco killers, two badass guys, and they come to this little town, and all the peasants are crawling in a muddy road, and they just prostrate themselves, and they crawl on the muddy road. And I'm like, what are these guys doing? And they come to a shrine of the Santa Muerte. So this stuff is very big with the cartels.
Absolutely, absolutely. As a matter of fact, the Mexican military, which predominantly does a lot of the fighting against cartel violence and issues in Mexico, specifically targets Santa Muerte shrines for destruction in an attempt to demoralize the cartels.
And of course, like you said in your book, you talk about how just the presence or the belief in Santa Muerte make these people far more stronger, braver.
Absolutely. Well, these folks think that they have supernatural protection, and whether or not you believe that they do, they certainly think that they do. And if you have, a group of people who are already violent, who already don't care about the law, who now think that they're backed by the power of death itself, they're very, very, very dangerous people.
And also, what makes her unique and different? I think you talked about what the Catholic Church deems as a saint. I mean, I guess the first one is she's not a alleged historical figure, although, of course, we both know that a lot of saints are probably not historical.
Absolutely. A lot of saints probably aren't historical. One thing I think that is very interesting and very special about Santa Muerte is her feeling of inclusion and also the degree of power that she is often considered to have. I think it's an interesting combination. If you look at a Santa Muerte statue, you will see that oftentimes she's holding a globe in one hand. It's a very common feature. That is to symbolize the power that death has over not just people, but over all of creation. In fact, in certain versions of Genesis, it'll actually tell you that after God said, I am, basically the first thing he made was death. And the reason why is death creates the possibility of change. The reason why I think the idea of death, the worship of death, and the worship of death figures is becoming so prominent and popular in our culture has to do with, not to get into politics of one kind or another, personal situations, but given what's going on, there's probably something someone's not happy about, very much not happy about in this world, okay? Whether or not it's crime and the sources of crime, or corruption and the sources of corruption, or lies and the sources of the lies, or whatever it may be. I know a lot of folks will say to me, just come up to me and they'll say, Tracey, stop this world. I want to get the heck off, okay? And a lot of folks will think that, all the violence, all the war, all the poverty, all the stuff, all the hate, none of us want this situation to actually keep on going the way it is. We all want it to stop. We all want it to end. None of us are suicidal, I don't think. I certainly hope no one listening is suicidal. And if you are, please get some help, please. But we do want an end to end of our situation, end of our problems, end of the pain, end of the stupidity, frankly. So, and the idea of death and cessation actually becomes extremely appealing, especially if you understand that death is not a finality, it's part of a cycle. If you're going to have a beautiful, fertile field in the springtime, you have to burn it in the fall. You have no choice. All right. And I think a lot of us have gotten to the point where we'd like to have that kind of situation happen. We don't want any sort of pain to continue happening. We just want fullness and abundance and a stop and a cessation to the stupidity, to the pain, to the hurting of other people. So that's why I think Santa Muerte is becoming such a popular figure. Not only is she a death figure, she's a death goddess, and she is known for being friendly. Okay, so if you have a friendly figure who is defined as having all power over the world, okay, and anything that has a possibility of change, and change is what we're so desperate for, Santa Muerte is a person or the figure that we in fact are looking for spiritually, which is why I think that her popularity has exploded so much in recent years. She is the figurehead of the world's fastest emerging new religious movement. And to kind of give you an idea of how many people are actually devoted to Santa Muerte, there are anywhere between 10 to 12 million professed Santa Muerte devotees in the world right now. There are 15.8 million members of the Mormon Church.
Wow.
So there are a lot of Santa Muerte devotees and a lot of Santa Muerte cultists. One of the things I have is I run the Lovely Mother Death Facebook group. And it's got about 70,000 or so people who follow that page. And a lot of folks, when I tell them that I personally am a Santa Muerte devotee and a Santa Muerte cultist, they will immediately jump to the sensationalized media idea of, oh, you know, the drug cartels and violence and black rituals held in the graveyard and all this sort of nonsense, you know? I can tell you, of 70,000 or so people I have, you know, that send me messages, they're grandmothers, they're school teachers, they're people who are looking for regular jobs, okay? I mean, it's you, it's me, it's normal folks. Okay, I'm sure there's probably a couple cartel people in there, but they ain't talking and they're not posting nonsense. You see what I mean? It really is regular, ordinary folks who feel they don't have anywhere else to turn, and they turn to the power of death, and death responds. Wouldn't you keep turning to the power of death if she kept responding? Well, that's why she's so popular.
No, I would agree, especially in these times. These are anxious times. And also what makes her unique, and I think you mentioned this, Tracey, is the fact that there's no karmic deal. I mean, as somebody who, I don't practice ceremonial magic anymore or anything like that, I've moved on. But there's always, I don't want to call it blowback, but you owe the spirits and you owe the gods. With Santa Muerte, it's basically, no, it's a freebie.
It has a tendency to be a freebie because one of my favorite examples has to do with money magic, okay? Because a lot of folks will decide that they're going to go ahead and do this big extended spell and this big ritual or pray to this big spirit because they want to win, say, a ton of money in the lottery. Okay, fine. And almost always those requests to the spirit or the spell are somehow coupled with this, well, if I win $100 million in the Powerball, I'll give half of it to charity, okay? Kind of like they're trying to make it better, okay, or like they're trying to make their own greed sound bad. Being greedy isn't necessarily bad. Death doesn't care, okay? Whether or not you win the Powerball and retire to a beach in Fiji or dedicate the entire thing to feeding the homeless, at the end, you yourself are naked and possessionless, okay? So since that's going to happen to you, that's going to happen to me, and that's going to happen to absolutely every single person who's listening to this podcast, well, there you have it. So to death, a lot of the requests tend to be a zero-sum game. To Santa Muerte, you do have to pay her, but it's like paying a contractor, honestly, okay? If I have someone come over to my house, okay, and they replace a faucet in my kitchen, I owe the man some money because he has a specialty and he replaced the faucet in my kitchen. It's not that I worship him. It's not that I am devoted my entire life to him, okay? This man is not elevated in any sort of sense other than the fact that he's my plumber. You see what I mean? There's a sense of equality when you work with Santa Muerte that I find extraordinarily appealing. Death doesn't want your worship. Death wants your friendship. It's a huge difference.
And unlike also other saints, or no, actually this is like other saints, and I didn't know that, but you write how saints can actually be punished, which I think was pretty cool. And you yourself talk about punishing Santa Muerte. Tell us about this idea of, kind of being mean
Absolutely.
To the saints.
It's called saint humiliation. Absolutely. This actually used to be an official Catholic practice. I learned how to do this from the nuns in catechism when I was a kid. Okay, because catechism was taught by nuns. Oftentimes, Catholics will go and they'll appeal to their statues of their saints, which honestly, you could look at as a form of shamanic witchcraft. I mean, if I go ahead and I took a statue of Freya, okay, and I put a candle in front of it, and I kept on speaking to the statue as if Freya were there, and then I prayed to Freya to help my little nephew because he's sick, I'm a good witch, okay? If I took a statue of the Virgin Mary and set a candle in front of her and acted as if she was there and asked her to make my little nephew better, then I'm a good Catholic, okay? From a magician's standpoint, there is no difference to me, okay? Although certainly the Catholics would argue they're not practicing witchcraft. So basically what you're doing is you're practicing a form of shamanic witchcraft. So if you were doing, if a saint or spirit did something nice for you, you'd give them a present, okay? You'd give them, a pack of cigarettes, an extra shot of tequila, you'd give them some food, play them some music. You mean, basically make a big deal out of the fact that they did something nice for you. And this wouldn't sound unfamiliar to anyone else who's used to working with spirits from any other kind of magical system. Okay, this is very normal, very normal. However, if the saint does not do what they are supposed to do, okay, with whatever time frame you think is appropriate, then you can start punishing the saint. One of the traditional Catholic things to do, for example, is Saint Joseph is the patron saint of employment, okay, because he was Jesus' father, so he had to work for a living to support his family. So therefore, you pray to Saint Joseph in order to get a job. If you don't get your job, what you do is you turn him towards the corner, and he doesn't get to sit with the rest of the family until he gets you a job because he's facing the corner like a little naughty boy. Okay?
Love it.
So I have seen people who have gone and placed their statues upside down. They'll stick them in closets. I know one guy, when he gets mad at his Santa Muerte, and he's got to get pretty mad for him to do this, he'll actually stick her outside by the trash can as a threat.
Like being a parent or mad at your dog or something like that.
It is. It really is. I have been known to yell. I yell really, really loudly, and my mom's a German national, so I guess you can kind of imagine the Viking character that goes into it. So I yell very loudly. Sometimes I will burn really, really cheap incense, the kind of stuff that gives you a headache on her altar. And, you can't get the nice stuff back. You can't get that nice stuff until you do what I want. And usually what will happen is within about 48 hours, it will become blatantly obvious. Something will happen. It tells me why it is that I couldn't get whatever it is that I was after. Okay, like maybe I'll get a phone call saying, someone's out of town and for that reason they can't help me, or whatever the case may be. Okay, or the issue will come through, will become solved. If it's solved, I thank her politely, and if it turns out something that basically I screwed, like I didn't realize that there was another issue in my way, preventing me from getting my desire, from getting my will, I will actually apologize to her. It's kind of like if you and I were good friends and you didn't do something for me and I yelled at you and told you you're a terrible person, and it turns out later it wasn't your fault. Of course I'd apologize, wouldn't I? I mean, I would.
Of course.
I mean, yeah. I mean, I'd say, I'm sorry, man. You didn't realize, you couldn't make it or you're out of town that weekend. I'm such a jerk. I shouldn't have been like this to you. And you'd say, yeah, Tracey, don't be a jerk like that again. And that'd be the end of it.
Especially after you put me out by the trash can or turn my head. Yes,
by the trash can, right? I totally owe you some tacos and beer after that happens. And, well, that's what Santa gets, some tacos and beer.
Before we get more into the history of Santa Muerte, because is your book right, this history really goes back in time. It's probably primordial, but there are other saints that are similar to her. The idea of death is not just a part of just the Mexican culture. Like you talk about La Difunta Correa. Tell us about her. She's amazing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. La Difunta Correa is also one of my other favorite folk saints. She's from Argentina in the 1840s. Her story is her husband was forcibly conscripted. There was a war going on in the country at the time, a civil war, and nationalist or loyalist forces to the government basically came and forced him in the military and dragged him off across the desert. So back in the 19th century, and certainly, for many millennia earlier, women would often follow armies. They do the cooking and the cleaning, the tending to the wounded, this kind of thing. And so she took off with her La Difunta Correa. She took off with her little baby after her husband to try to get him back out of the military, to try to support him, to try to do the camp wife thing, right? Well, she gets lost going through the desert looking for the army and trying to catch up with him, and she winds up dying of exposure. A couple days later, her body is found by some ranchers, and she still has her baby, and miraculously, the baby was still alive because he was able to still feed out of her breast, that even though she was dead, her breast was still full of milk. So the ranchers saw this, and that's clearly a miracle, okay? So they pick up the baby, they bury her, and of course they tell everyone about it because it's a miracle. And soon this lady's grave becomes a shrine. So now La Defunta Correa, or the deceased Correa, that's what that means, is the patron saint of women, children, cattle drivers, folks who are dying of dehydration or going on like extended, missions of some kind or another, just like she was and what she died on. And she's got a cult of, probably about 200,000 or so people. Truck drivers and cattle drivers, the other thing she's a patron saint of. Folks like to give her bottles of water to slake her eternal thirst. So she's very popular. There are a couple folk saints that are actually associated with Santa Muerte directly. One of them is, have you ever heard the story of Juan the Soldier? Juan el Soldado?
No, I haven't.
Juan el Soldado is, this is supposedly a true story. This was in the 1930s. There was a little girl about 7 or 8 years old who was found raped and murdered near this one army garrison. And there was an investigation that was extraordinarily brief. And this one guy named Juan the Soldier, his name was Juan, I think his name was Juan Morales, was pegged as the guy who raped and murdered this little girl. And his trial lasted literally about 5 minutes, and they shot him directly into a pre-dug grave. Okay, that's how quick the military was, quote, handling this justice. So the guy proclaimed his innocence the entire time. They shot him, they buried him, and he didn't stop proclaiming his innocence. As a matter of fact, his voice started to issue from the ground saying, please, I didn't do anything to that little girl. As a matter of fact, it's the guard captain that did it. Well, the grave is now bleeding. The grave is now accusing the guard captain. The grave is now, saying that he didn't do anything. The guard captain loses it. Everyone starts accusing the guard captain, and the captain himself winds up hung about a week and a half later. So, of course, they can't resurrect poor Juan el Soldado, so his grave winds up becoming a shrine for the people who are innocent and who are falsely accused. And since people who can be innocent and falsely accused often find themselves excluded from society in some fashion, Juan el Soldado, Santa Muerte, they work together.
Awesome. That's great. And for the listener, Vance has joined us. I guess he has risen from the dead, or maybe he's gotten out of the trash cans. Tracy and I have allowed him in here to our house. So do you have a question, Vance? And don't be punished for it.
Yeah, well, must have been that when I dressed Santa Muerte in a Rolling Stones T-shirt and a set of headphones, all of a sudden everything started working.
A Grateful Dead T-shirt.
Yeah, I'm wondering if I see kind of a confluence between the Gnostic Sophia, in at least some, maybe the fallen one, maybe not, and Santa Muerte. Tracy, do you have something to say about that?
Absolutely, absolutely. Sometimes you'll see some Gnostic setups. You'll see Baphomet set up as like a Lord of the World kind of figure, in absolute control of everything that unfolds upon it and what have you. I think I mentioned earlier with Santa Muerte having that globe in her hand, that she also is considered to have the same sort of grand scope and scale of power, just like Baphomet, just like Melek-Taz and the Yazidi religion, and that kind of thing. What I find interesting about it is that her power is thought to shape through change and through dying and through decay instead of through any sort of growth and evolution. However, as you just pointed out with the whole concept of Sophia, it actually has to do with one of the very reasons why I became a death cultist, so to speak. I am one of the people that thinks that I'm going to probably reincarnate for a number of times until I get it right, whatever get it right means. And in order to reincarnate multiple times, you have to die, right? I mean, that's kind of a necessary step on the process. Right. And a lot of folks don't want to seem to worship death or study death or get involved with death or anything involving death in general. And that just strikes me as extremely odd, because I actually kind of look forward to it, because maybe this time's the time I'm going to get it right and I don't have to reincarnate again. I mean, who knows? I might luck out, right? So, and if you think about what it is that is actually reincarnating, well, we've all had these discussions before. I'm not actually Tracy. I'm not actually a nurse. I'm not actually female. I'm not actually anything except my own one bright spark of consciousness, that same sort of idea. And depending how you look at the Sophia idea, is it something that was trapped by the archons of the world and is trying to escape? Or is it something that is being cultivated by the archons? Again, a lot of different ways of looking at it. But Santa Muerte and Sophia, by necessity, would have to work in hand, because the only way of cleaning and processing and redoing that consciousness would be through a constant reincarnative death cycle. You see what I'm saying? So they really do go hand in hand.
Sure.
Agreed. And I know I keep bringing the out in the trash can motif, but it reminds me of Philip K. Dick, the God in the Gutter. I think we have these deities like Sophia and Santa Muerte that are out there for us who are basically out there in the gutter. We're out there in the back streets of the world, of this very strange world that seems to be completely ruled by the elite. So I know this is a thing that will...
Arguably, they're exactly where we are.
Exactly. And that's what we're trying to figure out. So, yeah, we like these kind of blue-collared gods. They work well for us.
Absolutely.
But going back to the history, do you see you might say, the death goddess archetype or even Santa Muerte going back to very ancient times?
Oh, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there's some conjecture that the European roots of Santa Muerte may go as far back as ancient Greece. If you look at it, death has very frequently been a woman. In ancient Greece, for example, you had the three fates. You had the one that went and wove the thread of life, the one who measured it, of course, the one who cut it, which was, of course, a woman, okay, who was implacable. She was could not be controlled even by the king of the gods. Zeus could come up to her and she could just tell him to do whatever. He couldn't make her do anything.
Right.
And as a result, okay, you go ahead and you have the Romans who import this idea because, of course, they adopt a lot of Greek beliefs. And, of course, they renamed the gods. And this particular goddess, who was called a Tropos, became renamed to Parca Morta, or the fate of death. It's where we get words like mortuary, mortality, that kind of thing. Interestingly enough, funny enough, death was also thought to be present at every birth, not just for the mother who, of course, it's, ancient times, so high likelihood of her dying in childbirth, but also for her to see the child so she knew it, so she would know it its entire life. At that time, death actually had a different name. It was not Parca Morta. It was Parca Partula, like postpartum or parturition, okay? So the same goddess, the goddess of death that we get, the words for death now in our culture, we also get the words for giving birth and creating life. So I think that's kind of an interesting little dichotomy. Regarding the idea of death itself as being female, this cultural influence, of course, even also in Northern Europe. I mentioned earlier in this interview that I was raised by my mother. She's a German Catholic. She was raised concurrently with a set of Nordic Viking beliefs that in her culture just simply mesh with Catholicism in a very normal, everyday kind of way. Some folks will think that if you were raised with, Nordic beliefs or you're raised with the Catholic beliefs, that somehow they don't mesh, like one day you're Nordic and then you walk into another room and you're Catholic. It just wasn't that way. To her, they're almost the same thing. When she was a little girl, we're talking rural Germany, like in 1957, 58, okay? It'd be May Day, and she'd go to Catholic church in the morning, and she'd have, 2-hour mass, and it was said in Latin, and it was the whole Roman Catholic thing. And then the entire village would go outside because it was a festival day, and they would have a maypole. They would start wrapping flowers around while singing songs to Frey and Freya and Thor and Odin. And the priest would be standing right there on the steps of the church, and he'd just sort of bless the maypole and walk away. And they'd been doing that in that village for nigh unto 1,000 years. The first time my mother's village was mentioned in any kind of official record was in the tax records of Constantine in the year 798. Okay, that's how long kind of nonsense. So,
wow.
Right. So I've been raised with that kind of belief and that kind of outset. And one of the things that I learned as a little girl, I was convinced that hell was actually ruled by Hela, okay, who is, of course, the goddess of the underworld in Nordic myth, okay? Yes. And what she did is she actually took care of the gentle dead, the nice dead. I had kind of a weird conflated idea of hell, or the Hela version, the Nordic version, and heaven being the same thing, and somehow God and her. I was 6. What do you want me to tell you? But the point is, I grew up with the idea of a very friendly female death goddess, okay, who wasn't necessarily going to be, cold and implacable and hateful and brutal in any kind of way. So when I grew up, I see this picture, or I see this candle in the grocery store of Santa Muerte. She's smiling. She looks happy. She looks very friendly. And what's the first thing I go back to? Oh, that's just like Hela. I wonder what that is. And I grab it off the shelf. Universal power of death as a woman.
Yeah, very cool. Yeah, I also like the goddess Hel a lot. I haven't seen the new Thor movie, so I don't know how she's depicted, but I guess I'll wait on that one.
You wouldn't like it.
And, well, I like I forget the name of the actress. I like how she's depicted, but again, let's see how it goes in this day of commercializing old gods. What about you, Vince? Any questions about ancient goddesses that you have for Tracey or comment?
Well, I was just thinking about Hel, and the movie, of course, warped the mythology a bit. But have you seen the Thor movie, Tracey?
I have not, unfortunately.
Yeah, they depict the goddess of death as the brother of Thor and Loki, when actually she was the daughter of Loki, but she's pretty much totally evil, destroys everything, and isn't nice to anybody but her henchmen. Even then.
Yeah, that is not consistent with Nordic myth. That is very much not consistent with Nordic myth.
so that would not be a good example, right? For the listeners.
No, if you're taking the source mythology from the movies, no.
Yeah, and I was wondering, Santa Muerte is not always depicted as a skeleton. Is that correct? Sometimes does she ever have flesh?
I have seen some images of her that actually have her look quite a bit like Hel herself, where half of her face will be a lovely female and the other half will be skeletal. But generally speaking, she's depicted as a grim reaper figure. Even if you go with the Aztec version of her, the ancient Aztec Goddess, that is based on Mictlantecuhtli, was herself even thought to be a skeletal figure. As a matter of fact, she was born as a baby who was yet skeletal and starving and sacrificed immediately after birth. So the skeletal imagery is very strong and very consistent with Santa Muerte.
That's an important thing then.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned the Aztec Goddess, and I can't pronounce her name, and that's my fault. I grew up in Mexico as a kid, so even then it was your mother in Germany. We were taught all about the Catholic Church and the saints and Jesus and all that, but it was also very important to learn about the Aztec gods like Tlaloc and some of the others, what their days were and all that, but. Sure. I always had a problem pronouncing these names. So tell us about the Aztec goddess that is based on Santa Muerte, because in your book you talk, it wasn't so much about death, but she was sort of a psychopomp. She was somebody who took souls through the different heavens.
Absolutely. You could see her as a psychopomp-like figure. It's very interesting that even the Aztecs considered their goddess of death to be a goddess of life. I mentioned, I think, earlier in the interview that they believe that life and death were held in a constant balance to each other. They're always in negative balance to the earth in one form or another, hence why sacrifice was so important. The goddess of death, what they believed is when you died, you had to travel through the underworld through 9 different levels. That was intentionally supposed to be 9. It was supposed to be like a reversal of birth process. And once you got to the very, very bottom of the 9th level, you were supposed to find an obsidian palace where the goddess would be waiting for you. And she would take you into her cold and stony womb to await the rebirth of the next cycle of humanity. And that was how they believed that the cycles of man changed, how the aeons of man cycled through, is that everyone had to go wait in the goddess of death's womb and would eventually be reborn under some circumstances or another. As a matter of fact, the most recent aeon that started, everyone was dead in the goddess of death's womb. And a goddess of life and kind of a trickster god wound up sneaking in, stole the corpses or stole the souls, and wound up making people. So people were actually stolen from the goddess of death, and some say that she wants them back. So that's with Mictlantecuhtli. She was considered to be a very prominent death goddess. However, to what degree or what kind of rituals were celebrated around her, other than this festival that wound up growing into the Day of the Dead, we're not 100% sure. Reason why is when the Spanish went and rolled through Mexico when they conquered it, they went and burned about 85 to 95% of the Aztec libraries. So there's not a whole lot of information. One thing we do know that is very significant about her, and one thing that tells us that she had a dominant relationship relative to the other gods, is the Aztecs had a very complex and very interesting system of mask trading between their deities. So every god of every kind of thing would have a mask that represented their power. So if you're a god of storms, you had a storm mask. If you're a goddess of love, you had a love mask. If you're a goddess of jaguars, you had a jaguar mask. You get the idea. So in order to combine their powers, you may have one god hand his mask to another god, and then they would become some sort of combined force. For example, if you had the god of war hand his war mask to the god of rain, who is generally considered to be a kind and gentle figure, the rain god would acquire the war mask, and he'd become a god of violent and angry thunderstorms, okay, violent war storms, basically. The system of mask trading was between all of the Aztec gods except the gods of death, okay? Mictlantecuhtli and her husband did not trade their masks to the other gods. It implies that they had a dominant or at least protected status relative to the other Aztec deities. And given the prominence that death and the balance that life had in the culture to begin with, it's easy to infer that they had a dominant position instead of just a protected one. You see what I'm saying? So with that said, the goddess of death and her husband. One of the pictures you will find of Mictlantecuhtli, which is also very interesting, one of the most clear depictions we have of her is out of the Codex Borgia, which I believe is held in the Vatican archives at this time. But Borgia family wound up buying it, of course. That's why it's called the Codex Borgia. But it is a calendar. It's an Aztec calendar, okay? And it explains their cycle of the months. I think there's 20 months or something like that, or 20 days in their months, and which god governed which, and so forth, right? Well, the section that has Mictlantecuhtli, she is actually in a dominant section of the 4 goddesses of the seasons kind of thing. And there's 4 of them, of course. And 3 of the goddesses are all shown nursing different kinds of sacred animals. Like one of them is nursing a jaguar, one of them is nursing a snake. You get the idea. Mictlantecuhtli, on the other hand, you asked if she was always depicted as a skeletal figure. The Codex Borgia and this exact image actually depicts her as a skeleton. So she is sitting there as a skeleton. She's got a human sacrifice in her lap, basically. And she is ripping out its heart at the same time she's feeding it blood, living blood. And that is very different compared to the other images of the other goddesses. But there you have it.
And as far as you can tell, what was the Aztec view of death? Are we talking reincarnation, Tracey?
Eventual reincarnation, but it would be on an eventual basis, okay? Now we would believe in our typical aeon of man, we may have a number of reincarnations in this one aeon. The Aztecs believed that everyone had to die first in order for the next cycle of mankind to begin, so that is one significant difference. The cycles of life and the cycles of reincarnation were absolutely critical to the Aztecs. So like I said, the cycle of reincarnation was considered a kind of a group event, if you would, okay, not an individual one. Absolutely everything that the Aztecs did in their day-to-day life venerated and represented that cycle and tried to continue that cycle. As a matter of fact, the Aztecs actually 100% believed, that there was a chance every single morning that the sun itself would not rise out of the ground, because during the night it would have to go through the underworld, okay, and have to battle demons, and it may get killed, all right? And the thing that protected it, and the thing that swallowed all the demons of the night that lived between the stars so it would be safe for the sun to rise, was actually the goddess Mictlantecuhtli, the same goddess that we think went into Santa Muerte. She's considered the goddess of the direction of the west, where the sun actually descended into the land each day. So that is one of the interesting ideas, is that the goddess of death was responsible for making sure that the day began every single day, and that's interesting. The Aztecs also believed that every 52 years that they had a sacred fire at the center of their empire that had to be refreshed, and if it was not correctly refreshed and all of the temples were not, properly refreshed with the sacred fire, they would send runners, almost like marathon runners, holding these flames across the empire. That would be it. And we're not talking the end of the empire, we're talking the end of mankind, we're talking the end of fish kind. We're talking the end of, the deer in the swamps, the birds swimming over or flying over the lake, birds certainly swimming in the lake. It's over. Game over. Restart. So that is why that they had to sacrifice absolutely everything that they had up to, and of course, including people, which is what got them in so much trouble with the Spanish, because when the Spanish rolled in, the first thing they saw was one of the most densely populated places on earth. The Valley of Mexico, at the time the Spanish came into Mexico, had over 1 million people living in it. It's the most densely populated, more densely populated than India, more densely populated than China, more densely populated than Japan. And what do they see? This entire population going and worshiping death, killing people, ripping their hearts out, and throwing them down the temple steps. How many people? Well, in 1484, the great-grandfather of Moctezuma II, which is the guy that Cortez would wind up destroying the empire under, dedicated a temple to one of their gods of death in Tenochtitlan, and over a course of 4 days, he had 80,000 people sacrificed in 4 days.
Wow.
Yes.
Ooh, that's a factory.
Yes. So we're talking mass human sacrifice. It was not a incidental effect. It was mass human sacrifice. Now, sourced from the Aztec point of view, this wasn't necessarily a bad thing. All they're going to do is go through the underworld. They're going to go meet up with Mictlantecuhtli. She'll say hi. They'll say hi, and they'll just wait for the next day on together. What gives? Of course, you Spanish Catholics did not see it that way.
No, not at all. And I know this is a topic of much debate, but why exactly did the Aztecs believe in human sacrifice? Some have said it really fueled the universe. It's what the gods needed the blood, or it was a symbolic representation of the great play up in the horizon. What do you think? Why did the Aztecs were so bloodthirsty?
The most popular theory is that the gods actually literally required a diet of human hearts in order to continue their thing, to continue protecting the sky and making sure the wheels of the heavens continued and the corn popped out of the ground and did all the divine things. And the reason why is the world was so hard, even the gods were struggling against it, and they needed human help. And if humans wanted food, if humans wanted shelter, if humans wanted cures from their diseases and their pains and their troubles, well, guess what? Humans are going to pony up. And it's as simple as that. Of course, there are some people who are proponents of the idea that the reason why human sacrifice was so popular in not only the Aztec culture, but the Olmecs, and it wasn't just the Aztecs, okay? In fact, most of the tribes surrounding the Aztecs in the region were also practicing human sacrifice and had been practicing human sacrifice for centuries, if not millennia. We always think of the Aztecs as being, very fierce and very dangerous and very warrior-like people. And they were, certainly don't get me wrong, but there were other tribes living around the region that even scared the crap out of them that they wouldn't invade. The Purupechas to the south, as a matter of fact. Going even further south, they were afraid of the Mayans. So that kind of gives you an idea. It wasn't just the Aztecs doing this, okay? So a lot of what some people think is there's not a lot of large game available in the Valley of Mexico, nothing really much larger than deer. So how are you going to support a population of over 1 million people with enough protein to support them? Well, the people themselves, of course.
Yes, it seems that even back then they had a form of eugenics, population control. I guess it's written, I don't know if it's written in the stars, but it's definitely written in our DNA, regardless of the time.
Absolutely.
And of course, we all know that the Aztecs were eventually defeated by Hernan Cortés, and that's a wonderful story which I got drilled in my head as a kid, and the Night of Tears, and how they were able to defeat Montezuma and Montezuma's revenge, and it's a fascinating story. But the Aztecs fell because between two powerful empires, the Aztecs fell. But out of that came sort of the syncretism of two cultures. And Tracey, do you see any tie-ins between Santa Muerte and the Virgin of Guadalupe?
Absolutely, 100%. That is actually a very popular conjecture that Santa Muerte and the Virgin of Guadalupe are in fact the same figure. To start with, the Virgin of Guadalupe is thought to be a very specific emanation of the Virgin Mary. There are a large number of Catholics who will venerate the Virgin Mary, of course, as the Mother of Christ and Queen of all saints and all this. But they will actually see her as sort of a psychopomp-like death figure, for the simple reason that not only did she bring Jesus, Lord and Savior, into this world, she also brought him out of this world. She was there when he was crucified at the cross. She was one of the 3 Marys that prepared his body. And when 3 days later, during the resurrection, when she showed up at his tomb and the angel's like, sorry, Jesus took off for heaven, she, of course, his mother was there. And, of course, when she dies herself, she didn't actually die. She ascended into heaven alive and bodily because she got that kind of privilege being the mother of God. So a lot of folks will see the Virgin Mary already as kind of a psychopomp-like figure. So the groundwork within the Catholic faith was already set for this. Regarding the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe herself, in 1526 or thereabouts, so about 5 years after the collapse of the Aztec Empire, so the Spanish were controlling everything but hadn't been for long, there was a peasant by the name of Juan Diego who had a habit of traveling over this one particular hill near his home, big giant hill. And he goes over the hill one day, and this beautiful woman appears, okay? And she looked like an Aztec princess. I mean, she had, long black hair. She's wearing this beautiful pink dress, this beautiful cloak. And she says, hey, I want you to build a temple right here dedicated to me. And the guy kind of looks at her and he freaks out and he books it because people appearing out of nowhere is kind of scary. So he goes and he tells the local bishop about it, and the bishop tells him, you're just seeing things, don't worry about it, it's not real, okay? So the guy, he tries going over this hill a couple times, and every time he tries going over this hill, this woman appears, beautiful woman, build me a temple, build me a temple. Well, Juan Diego stops going over the hill, okay, because no one believes him, he thinks it's crazy, he's getting scared, and how about he just forgets this whole hill business? So not long afterwards, it was wintertime, it was cold in January, his best friend becomes deathly ill, all right? And he's got to visit him, and we're talking about literally they're having to prepare a funeral mass. They think his friend is going to die. And the only way to get over to his friend's house quickly is to go over the same freaking hill. So he goes over to the top of the hill, and sure enough, this woman appears again. And this time she says, "Where's my temple? I've been asking for a temple. Where is it?" And he says, "Look, lady, I keep on telling people you're appearing to me. No one believes you. I don't know what's going on. This is nuts. Would you leave me alone?" And the woman kind of smiles and says, "No one believes you, huh? Go pick all of these flowers and take them to the bishop in the village." And the guy says, "What flowers?" And she snaps her fingers, and the entire hillside in January is covered in roses. Now, keep in mind, Juan Diego had probably never seen roses. They came from Europe, came from Spain, So middle of January, tons of flowers blooming he's never seen before, exotic flowers. Now he really panics. He goes and he cuts a bunch of flowers, he fills his cloak, and he races for the village. He gets to the village, he finds the bishop, he's trying to tell him the story about this woman and the flowers. He's babbling, it's not making any sense. Okay, he keeps on saying something about Cuatla Supe, okay? In Aztec language, in Nahuatl, it means she who crushes the serpent, okay? And he goes and he unrolls his cloak. And sometime between his panicked run from the top of the hill down to go see the bishop, the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe had painted itself on the inside of his cloak, that famous image that everyone's so familiar with, her in our nimbus of light with the blue cloak and all this kind of thing, had painted itself on the inside of the cloak. And of course, the roses fell to her feet. And that's a very classic image of the Virgin Mary with roses at her feet. Just as this happens, some guy comes running into the church and he's like, "Juan Diego's friend, the guy you were preparing the funeral mass for? You don't have to worry about it, Bishop. He's 100% healed. He is fine." Now the bishop has now seen 2 miracles in about 2 minutes. And he's like, "Got it, Virgin Mary." So they go ahead and they erect this temple exactly where it was that she kept appearing to Juan Diego. And there you have it. Now, what's interesting about the story of the Virgin of Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe, the image that she presents is very atypical to the kinds of images you would see from Europe of the Virgin Mary at the time. Okay, typically images of the Virgin Mary were fair-skinned. Certainly, Spaniards themselves were typically blonde-haired and blue-eyed. And so if Juan Diego had seen images of the Virgin Mary, you would assume he would see an emanation of the Virgin Mary that he'd be familiar with. Okay, so blonde-haired, blue-eyed woman, effectively. Yet the woman who appeared to him looked exactly like a native princess. She spoke to him in his native tongue. And if you look at the image of the Virgin of Guadalupe, you'll see that right over her womb, right over her lower abdomen, she actually has a symbol drawn on her belly called a Nahi-Hualan. It is a 4-petaled lotus that was supposed to symbolize to the Aztecs the 4 different corners of the universe. Okay, so the pink dress that she is wearing, the black cord, symbolizes to the Aztec culture that she is pregnant. The cloak of stars that she is wearing symbolizes to the Aztec culture that she is the goddess Tonantzin, the whole picture. Kind of a celestial mother goddess kind of figure who was responsible for helping birth and create the entire world. So the place that the Virgin Mary had her temple built was actually also a destroyed temple to the goddess Tonantzin. Okay, so when you have this woman who looks like an Aztec princess and she speaks Nahuatl and she shows up demanding a temple on the exact same spot that the old temple, the exact same looking woman asked for, you'd think that Tonantzin and the Our Lady of Guadalupe are the same figure. And a lot of folks certainly do believe that Our Lady of Guadalupe and Tonantzin are the same figure. Now, given that the interests that the Aztecs had, the necessary interests that they felt they needed to have, in the idea between death and sacrifice and how they were held in constant balance to each other, if the figure of Tonantzin was so culturally important that it would have brought forward, despite the Spanish conquest, which killed roughly 2/3 of the Aztec population, one way or another, that they would have to have a balancing death figure to counter this mother of life that was so important that she got brought forward and became our Virgin of Guadalupe. So who would that be? Well, Presumably, it would be the opposite of the goddess Tenansen, so probably Mictlantecuhtli. We're not 100% sure it's her opposite because of all the Aztec libraries that were destroyed, but given the elevated position that she clearly held with her not trading masks and everything else, she's thought to be, like, again, a female death figure held in the necessary tandem to the female life figure who was resurrected as Our Lady of Guadalupe. And so some people think that Santa Muerte was necessary to have grown up from Mictlantecuhtli just because there's such a strong cultural need to have these figures in balance because of the idea between life and death itself having to be in balance. And if you have Our Lady of Guadalupe, the Virgin Mary, being considered also a death figure because she brought Jesus out of this world just as she brought him into it, there's actually some conjecture that Santa Muerte and Our Lady of Guadalupe are in fact the same figure. Which is why you will find that some images of Santa Muerte that you will find almost look identical to the ones of Our Lady of Guadalupe. The same style of halo, the same style of cloak. I mean, really, it looks like Our Lady of Guadalupe, except she's a skeleton. And that's why you see that image.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've got a question. It's well known in many circles that are involved in Santa Muerte that she grants favors and so forth. We were talking about that earlier in the interview here. What is her motivation for being nice to anybody in mankind? Why would she go through the effort to grant favors to humanity?
I believe that Santa Muerte is a very sympathetic figure for this simple reason that death follows us around constantly. You and I, we have absolutely no idea when we're going to die. After this interview, I could hang up, go lay down, and just simply not wake up again. It happens. It happens to people every single day. She also sees our foibles. She sees our fears. She sees our screw-ups. She sees our hopes. She sees our dreams. She sees everything. Now, if you were going to run with the idea that death is not supposed to be a cold and cessating thing, okay? Death is not an end. It's not a finality. It's not supposed to destroy. It's more like pruning a tree that needs to be pruned. Okay, if you don't prune your trees, they're going to wind up dying anyway from overgrowth. Okay, or bugs living in them or something like that. You need to clean things, like I mentioned earlier. You need to go and if you have a fertile field in the springtime, you're going to have to burn it in the fall. Okay, so the idea that death is a destructive figure is a negative figure. To me, really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think honestly, it's a cultural idea. I mean, we think certainly, the graveyards or death and dying are terrible things. I mean, think about all the movies about dead things coming and rising and eating people, or not wanting to live near graveyards because they're spooky or some other nonsense. My grandparents are buried in a graveyard. My grandparents were very sweet people. Everyone's grandparents are probably buried in some graveyard. You know what I mean? They're not bad places. They're full of our friends and our family. So if you run with the idea that death isn't evil, that people who have died aren't necessarily evil, they're our friends, they're our loved ones, they're people that cared about us and we still care for, why wouldn't death, by extension, have the capacity to be generous, to be kind, to always be around, and to just want to help a little bit?
Well, I can see the absence of the negative around death, the balance and so forth, and keeping things going. That came through in the Aztec mythology, right? But why would she favor humanity? I could see her being neutral, right, as part of a balance. Maybe sympathy. I mean, maybe relating to us.
Plus, we're also her favorite playmates. Honestly, because I know it sounds silly, okay, but one of the best ways, the next extremely common way that Santa Muerte devotees will venerate Santa Muerte is not in quiet contemplation. It's not lighting a single candle in the darkness and praying for an hour and a half. Oh no, there's a lady I know who runs a very popular botanica a couple towns away, and she actually every single week hires a guy to come in and play music to her Santa Muerte statue that she keeps in her shop, that she is convinced is what's responsible for her high turnover, not her high turnover, but her high profits that she gets. Okay, they will sing, they will dance, they will actually enjoy and try to share the living gust of life with her, okay? That's why you give Santa Muerte tequila. That's why you give her cigarettes. It's not like they're going to kill her. That's why she wants chocolate. That's why she loves getting jewelry. Well, no, I'm serious. Okay, it's like she loves chocolate. She loves jewelry. She loves the things of life, okay? If death was interested in only killing things, everything would be absolutely dead. Death doesn't want to do that. Death only wants to prune. Death wants to see things grow more beautiful. Death wants things to become more interesting. Death wants that field to grow. And what makes that field grow, what sows the seeds, who makes the art, who makes the music, who makes the chocolate, who brings the beer? It's not the squirrels. It's people.
Well, I think we're getting to the end game, the death of our interview. So, Tracey, before we go, are you working on anything else? I mean, this is a fascinating book that gives a whole new dimension to this, as you say, a very rising, popular spiritual being and this growing religious movement. Any other books or saints are you going to tackle next?
I am working on a second book of Santa Muerte. This one will be more of a grimoire. The original book that we're discussing now has 49 different spells in it, as well as extensive instructions and examples of how to adapt your current magical practice and practices to working with Santa Muerte. Because I really do believe you don't have to be necessarily a witch, quote unquote, or a ceremonial magician or what have you. I describe myself as a chaos magician, first and foremost. So if that gives you an idea. The next book I am working on is an extended grimoire of working with Santa Muerte, or extended spell book. One thing that I think will be particularly interesting, that is featured you do not see in spell books available on the market these days, is I actually do intend to cover honestly negative situations. Okay, so when your daughter has been sexually assaulted, what do you do? When you wake up and the cops have called and your son is in jail, now what do you do? Those kinds of things that you don't often see addressed in these kinds of books. But if you're already living on the fringe of the society, if you're already at the end of your rope, if you already have all these problems, well, who else are you going to turn to? And you're going to need that information for addressing those kinds of issues. So that's one thing I'm going to go ahead and be addressing in this book. Should be very interesting. I do also, of course, plan to cover all the nice things, of course, how do you get a new girlfriend? How do you get a new job? All that kind of stuff. So I'm doing house cleansings, how to do, I'm thinking about doing maybe egg divination. That's something you don't see written on a whole lot, but it's actually very popular with Santa Muerte. One thing that you'll see folks do is if they think that there's something going on with you, like you're not sure if someone's cursing you or if it's just a bad situation you got yourself into or what have you, is they will take an unfertilized chicken egg and they will roll it up and down someone's body, and then they will crack it into a glass of water and then read what the yolk does, like if it's got drops of blood in it or if the water turns instantly cloudy, or there's a variety of different ways of reading it. And after reading it, that's how you diagnose and then address the problem. So yeah, so it's going to be an extended grimoire working with Santa Muerte, and it's going to cover not only the normal spells and how to do ritual type things, but it's also going to cover the things that no one seems to cover, but I frankly feel someone needs to.
Wonderful. We look forward to that work. But I think that's all the time we have. Vance, thanks for joining us, and you can go back to the trash cans, although we'll all end up there, the grave.
My pleasure, Mikhail.
And thank you very much, Tracey. We really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for coming on AM Bite and discussing your great book, Santa Muerte.
Thank you guys so much for inviting me. It really is a lot of fun. Thanks.
And there you have it. Oh, you true seeker warriors. Our interview with Tracey Rowling on her book, Santa Muerte, The History, Rituals, and Magic of Our Lady of the Holy Death. In our second part, we delve deeper in philosophical and theological meanings of death and the other aspects of Santa Muerte. Tracey also discusses the Day of the Dead in Mexican culture, including how the Spanish appropriated it and created their own Catholic necromancy. Tracey also grants her thought-provoking and soul-stirring views on the reality of the gods, as well as presents other occult saints that can assist you in being alive today. And so much more, and so much more. As mentioned in the intro, members will get a bonus interview. Perhaps a Christmas bonus, if you would. It's with Alistair Conwell, where he discusses his book, The Audible Livestream, Ancient Secret of Dying While Living. A perfect companion on the discussion of death and its illusion that you can dispel if you gain enough gnosis. Yes, and always, only $5.99 a month to join. Complete and not partial shows. Access to 11 years of work and more than 375 episodes. Your own private RSS feed where you can listen to all complete shows on the podcaster of your choice. invitation to our Inner Sanctum of Gnosis Facebook group, where we are building a community of mystics, madmen, and sages. And many past guests hang out there, like Robert Price, Andrew Phillips Smith, Sean Martin, Robin Robertson, Tim Freak, and many more. All for your interaction. And I'm always there to directly and personally answer your questions and issues. Same benefits if you become a patron at Patreon, except you get early shows. If anything, a few shekels here and there via PayPal or Patreon. Let's keep this Red Pill Cafeteria open, and let's keep that blasphemous content a-coming for the rest of 2017 and all of 2018. Hopefully. I can't do it without you. Much appreciation for those of you who support on a weekly basis. It's the holiday season and a time of death and renewing. I hope you gain more tools to, again, become alive, get close to the great life the Mendians spoke about. Hang in there, listen to your dearly departed, because they still speak to you. Like Santa Muerte, they tell you that everything's gonna be alright. If you would just wake up and tell a better story. I'll be with you every step of your story as you are with mine. Hello and goodbye as always.